Hey everybody, welcome back. It is August 11th, 2020, and we are, sure enough, still going through V cipher decoding to conclude the summer here. A series that I thought was going to conclude back before the summer started has certainly had a lot of afterthoughts, hasn't it? If anybody's unaware of what I'm talking about, the video I did actually, this one right here, this coronavirus slavery of the cheetah, back at the end of May, I was pretty sure was going to be my last video I was going to be doing for the summer because I've been so busy. But as you can see, culminating in just a couple days ago, I did just post an interview I did with Corey Daniel, the Phoenix Enigma, which was a really good discussion. If you haven't checked it out, go check this video out. We touched on a lot of some of the preambles to what we're going to talk about tonight, in fact, with the current war and the communism underpinnings and China's involvement in it all. But kind of a brief announcement in regards to, some things, some housekeeping on the channel too. I did just get a Theta stream key, as I've been talking about over on the Patreon channel of doing. I'm going to be doing a lot more live stream activities in the future for patrons. Doing various things using Theta in various ways. So I'll announce more on that in the coming days throughout the end of the week, the weeks, month. I still am in the process of moving, guys. I'm very busy with the school year starting up and a bunch of other stuff. So major changes coming, really cool ones. A lot of the YouTube side stuff is actually going to remain the same. You can expect kind of updates like these. But for the patrons anyway, as you guys can see, Theta.tv live event VIPs have always been one of the perks that I'm offering at the $3 tier level. Generally speaking, this is just donating, supporting the channel. Thank you to all the patrons, especially those who've joined just in the last week. I've had a handful of you that have joined on the community, and I'm enjoying getting to know you. I will always respond to your posts, anybody who ever joins over on that side of the community, and the money will always go back to the research. Of course, they're really expensive books, video equipment I want to buy to improve the channel, but books that are rare that otherwise we wouldn't get a chance to look at otherwise. So anyway, those are just some cool ways you guys can anticipate to interact. Here's the stream tool. Obviously I haven't opened this up to anybody, but they have all sorts of weird stuff here in Theta for me to incentivize and interact with and do giveaways and create items, and it's interesting. There's a whole live stream component to it. I'm gonna be tooling around with this. I'm gonna be kind of learning the ropes, doing some live chats with the patrons to start off with, I guess. But anyway, I will learn all about the Theta platform and let you guys know as I build it out how it's all going to work. But that's just kind of housekeeping announcements. We're going to quickly get into some topics that go from our favorite V Fox faction through the false history narrative that's playing out, through the Space Force unveiling that we're seeing, through, of course, the actual warfare we seem to be seeing with this Beirut blast that happened at the beginning of the month that I needn't play the video of. Everybody's seen it on the internet at this point. But we're going to be looking a little bit further between the lines on what the heck is going on, because think what you might about the space weaponry in this, that we're not going to dive too much into the particulars of any given story today. My aim is more to expand on the conversation I had with Corey the other night and show you guys how China's involvement in whatever war they're fighting with the factions that are infighting over here in the political arena, just because of the elections coming up. There's more than one arena being fought on right now, right? China versus the U.S. We've got the internal fighting within the U.S. We also seem to have fighting between Hezbollah and Israel, and it's just a lot to take in. But everybody, it's like Risk. If you've ever played a board game of Risk, you know that geopolitically speaking, time of war is kind of nuts. You're fighting a war on all fronts of all borders all at once. So this is all to say, interesting topic, this blast. But what I want everyone to keep an eye on right now, because this is only something that we haven't seen manifest. If anybody is a fan of Cliff High's research, there was a term in the data, in the Cliff High's WebBot data that came out back in 2010 to 2011, speaking of the time we're going through right now with the coronavirus and such, but it being accompanied with what was being called as the Israeli mistake, quote unquote, the Israeli mistake. And the Israeli mistake was an incident where there was a disagreement, a clash between Iran, Hezbollah, and Israel, where war broke out into the public domain, kind of as we saw with the Beirut explosion. But there was unintended consequence that came from whatever chemicals got released in this explosion. It got up into the jet stream, and it started to carry particulates all over the earth and making people sick and killing crops. So the jury is still out for me as to what has played out here, but what it seems to me, and I'd actually like to get Cliff High's opinion on this. I sent him an email just inquiring briefly about that topic to see if he had any words to say about this event in Beirut playing out to be potentially the Israeli mistake. I haven't received a response. I mean, I don't expect him necessarily to respond to me, but I guess keep an eye out as we go forth, irrespective of any of the China stuff that you're going to see. It's a different war fighting domain over there in the Middle East. We've got enough of our own stuff going on over here than to really be concerned necessarily about something maybe that we don't need to be. But keep your eyes peeled for more to come with this also corroborating story from last month on July 4th, where there were all of these explosions in these power plants in Iran that were blowing up. And it's just more between the lines that you can do research on with these recent world of geopolitical events. But anyway, where they wanted to begin, tonight's presentation is tying together China with the U.S. and how the U.S. and China are clearly fighting not even a covert war anymore. It's quite overt, in fact, with all the evidence that we're going to go through. From here all the way to here are the articles we're going to go through, and we're not going to spend too much time on any individual article. I'm going to hope to show you guys after we let Edward Griffin talk here about communism in general and what is so prescient and foreboding almost about his words as he describes what communism is, and show how it's unfolding in our perspective. And I'm going to show you some Fox faction stuff and space and Space Force evidence along the way as it goes along with the larger body of the V-steganography research that we've been diving into this year. And you guys are probably, as usual, going to see the tapestry painted as we go. So first and foremost, I'm just going to let Edward Griffin, this kind of a mini lecture he did in 1969, speak for itself for a couple minutes, and then we'll dive right in.
Thank you for taking the time to be here. The subject matter itself is revolution. We're going to examine in quite a bit of detail the communist theory and practice of revolution, particularly as applied to the United States. Now, this will not be something dreamed up out of thin air. This will be the strategy as taught by them and advocated by them in their own manuals, in their textbooks, and in their schools. The communist program for revolution in America is divided into two phases, violent and nonviolent. But the strategy for violent revolution calls for chaos, anarchy, mass confusion and panic among the people, a crisis in government, and then, out of the vacuum, the sudden seizure of power by communist-led guerrilla bands.
Did you guys hear that? It was basically what's playing out right now with the seizure of all of the attempted forfeiture of rights, I should say, rather than seizure. There hasn't really truly been seizure of these things he's listing per se. But as it's ending, as it's culminating in, we are basically seeing these militant groups form, especially with Antifa, to corroborate basically the playbook that Edward Griffin is laying out for what communism in times of revolution specifically is, and how you can identify it. It's pretty crazy. I'll let him continue here for another minute and a half or so.
The nonviolent phase of revolution actually is more important to the communists and more potentially dangerous to us. Now,
and this is what we talk about here, of course. Steganography is the non-violent form of warfare for a whole class of sorcerers, wherever their alliances might be, as it plays out in the theater that we live. So, anyway.
Strategy for this phase calls for the gradual transition of our government into a communist regime, done peacefully and legally, but under the banner of socialism. Now, a good place to begin is with this communist booklet entitled On the Nature of Revolution, the Marxist Theory of Social Change. It was written by Herbert Aptheker, one of the leading theoreticians of the Communist Party in this country. And on page 11, Aptheker says, the equating of violence with the nature and process of revolution is not correct. Violence may or may not appear in such a process, and its presence or absence is not a determining feature of the definition. Now, this comes as quite a surprise to many of us because for years we've been used to thinking of communist revolutions only as those which involve the overthrow of governments by force and violence. Now, that entire phrase has been written and spoken so often as a single concept that many of us haven't even considered the possibility that the communists might have another approach to their goal.
So think about it. This is what we've talked about on this channel too. What are we being distracted from? What's really happening with all the mimetic underpinnings for year zero, the current war, the V-Steganography at large? And of course, we're always looking at the subtle tactics, the art of war, the Jesuit casuistry is what we call it, right? So Jesuit casuistry is going to be absolutely inextricably tied to anything in this communist realm, especially with the V-Fox faction hallmark on it. And we're going to find that, as we always do today, further. But remember what Edward Griffin's saying here about communistic revolutions being somewhat peaceful. So you have a distraction happening with Antifa, but then what's happening behind the scenes, in addition to that is going to be the psychological warfare, the mind control that we talk so much about on the Patreon side of things. If anybody's, unfamiliar, that's where we talk about the mind control aspects, alchemy, the things that get banned on YouTube, we post straight over to Patreon. So that's all that stuff we talk about over there. That's the stuff that's happening. And we're going to see that evidence today as it's playing out, at least just from the China perspective, and see why this is all actually tied in with the technocrats, the banker class. And I don't know if China's necessarily working hand in hand with that left side agenda. But we're going to draw some conclusions as we go throughout today. Here's Edward Griffin for just a couple more seconds.
That they might overthrow the government without force and violence. That they might, in fact, plan to come to power through means that properly could be called peace and politics. But they also refer to it as the socialist revolution. But here again, they all add up to the same thing. In other words, simply stated, we're living in an era of two kinds of revolution, one violent and the other nonviolent.
And that sums up what we're talking about very well. We've got two kinds of revolutions simultaneously happening. The nonviolent is happening through the tendrils of politics, through socialist agendas. This is all the stuff that the left stands for. It's no longer the liberal Democrats from when Kennedy was in office. It's not even the same party. It's totally taken over by the communists. And one might even anticipate that with as vehemently opposed to China as the United States seems to be, that very well might be the battle that's being fought. Remember, we've talked on this channel a lot about the golden Chinese cryptograms and the mystery of the Grand Canyon. Of course, go back to this video and others like it. Bix Weir's research is keen into that. But if you want to verse yourself off on this gold bar mystery, I only need bring it up because remember how inextricably it is tied to the Economist magazine cover for the gold, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, whatever reset. Bitcoin reset is what we most often talk about here on this channel. But remember that we've also talked about the coin itself on the Phoenix being something of a marker of what's happening behind the scenes. And we've also mentioned that in the coronavirus outbreak, there was a news outlet called Tencent in Taiwan that broke the true death numbers in China, which was at the time in the tickers of the several hundreds of thousands before they shut it off. So there's something going on very clearly, to me anyway, and other people have eyes to see, that this 10-cent piece that the Phoenix is holding is relating in some way to the 10 cents that we're seeing in the world. And one of the main things that a lot of people, that hasn't escaped people, just in addition to the Beirut story in the last couple of weeks, is that TikTok has been banned by President Trump as, an app that is to be banned on phones. I don't know how else to put it. You can't use it on American devices. And so there's all these, there are buyout arrangements happening with how do American companies bid for this, Instagram saying they're going to integrate it with their platform. But Tencent is the company that owns TikTok, right? It's a company in China that owns TikTok, and this is what this war is all about. There's surveillance happening on the devices, presumably, right? Well, interestingly enough, when you just go look at Tencent, some interesting things pop up as it relates to some of its other apps. Its main offering is Tencent QQ, which is an instant messenger, and WeChat is the other one, which is also being banned by the United States. So there's this war against Tencent as it would relate to the world currency. Remember, this was supposed to be the banker coin, the banker revolution, burning of the fiat money, rising of the phoenix from the ashes. It's funny how we've got coin shortages now too, right? Money laundering happening everywhere. The money printing, the money printer go brr meme, just printing money ad infinitum. The phoenix being very symbolic of the hermetic crimson philosopher's stone, as well as we also talk about in the other side of the channel on the Patreon end. But this is all to do with gold, as the bankers would have had this whole reset go for them, right? And then, of course, being tied back to this mystery, our presumption being there being way more gold than we can possibly imagine on this planet, which would devalue that investment in almost to the point where it's just not as good, it's not sound money as it could be, as you put it, because it can't be verified how much there is, which is essentially where Bitcoin comes in. And we've talked all about Bitcoin there. The Bitcoin video that got banned on YouTube is also over accessible for the patrons as well. So anyway, Q is an obvious tie-in to the Q phenomenon that we see playing out in front of us and have seen since 2017, October 2017. Also notice 11th of November, 11/11 is when the place was founded, this company. And as we're going to resource later on in the video, Zach Hubbard's work lately has also focused on Jesuits and showing a lot of the gematria numbers relating to this, and 1111 is one of those numbers, as you'll find. And I'm just going to refer you over to his work to just give him some views. Watch the body of his Jesuit work. It is, as it relates to the gematria side of things, it's very, very well thought out and critical. As far as some of his conclusions that he draws, I think they're a little bit off base, but the numeric part of it he's got down. He always has. And not even off base. I don't know if Zach goes far enough is the problem with his conclusions that he draws. I think that's the thing I'm looking for. I guess he isn't off base. I would like to see him go a little bit further with his analysis. But we're seeing, anyway, back to the 10-cent riddle, we're seeing some things happen in plain sight as it relates to battling back against this paradigm. I think the canceling that we're seeing against this 10-cent corporation, which if this association has anything to do with actual correlation to the Q phenomenon, then we're seeing a pushback against the original plan of the money reset. And that would, again, favor the Bitcoin agenda. Remember last video, we touched briefly on the Bitcoin so-called hack of Twitter within the Fox faction of people whose accounts were hacked. And we see this happening for an amount of $113,000 of Bitcoin. The election is on November 3rd this year to look out for. This is going to be another thing to watch because of distrust, dishonesty, fabrication, mainstream, bullshit. All these things equal 113, as you recall, in gematria. And so we want to keep an eye out for the misdirection, in other words. I'm looking away what's actually going on. Remember, we've also talked about there being the gold market rocked by counterfeit gold out of China. We've seen China send automatic weapons to Antifa, parts of weapons to Antifa and Black Lives Matter. I think, in my eyes, proving support for whatever communist agenda that China is hoping to accomplish here, the complicity of this side of the basically everything that the Democrats are getting behind on the far left. Can't prove complicity, but it's interesting to show the preponderance of evidence that points to such a supposition. You also have stories like this. China's decoupling from the U.S. GPS network. I don't know if this means that if they decouple from it, they will effectively be able to EMP hours. I don't know what their plan would be with that, but you get a lot of articles around them launching their final Beidou satellite, where they talk about it here as well. Integration of Beidou and 5G is important to the path toward Chinese development of information technology, is what their internal Huawei representatives are saying. And of course, Huawei was the company that America was at odds with kicking out of the country at the beginning of the COVID-19 scare. Look at all the 5G tie-ins. Now I've got one of my more than one of my subscribers over on Patreon messaging me right now about the 5G stuff and what's happened with it. And I actually, because of a lot of the things I'm seeing in the arena here, I actually don't think the danger of 5G is imminent any longer. I think knowing about the larger aspect of what is happening, by the way, the 17% larger, the Q, the 17th letter in the alphabet, right? It's all there, guys. The imminent danger of 5G isn't apparent to me any longer. I think I will do a video eventually about how I think the technology factors into the presumed Men in Black program, where we are able to identify off-worlders, as it were, and distinguish them from human. But I will digress from that thought and save that for a later video, because we've got some ground to cover here yet. And keeping this at just a quick update for you guys, right? Because, gosh, I still have to get a Patreon video out, which I'll be posting tomorrow. But the satellite, Beidou satellite launch, plus Joseph Farrell rendered some interesting thoughts. Because all of a sudden, just as I was talking about, once they've got their own satellite up and they no longer need it for assistance as a tool, they can sabotage the one that was in place before, which is seeming to happen with all of our American-based GPS companies, Garmin and the like. They're experiencing all sorts of system outages, software issues, and this could also be attributed to the magnetic anomalies that we have in our magnetosphere from the sun whacking out on us right now too. But these are all very timely data points to look at in terms of the quality of the stories that are dropping. Not to mention, over in the Middle East, do we have China working with Saudi Aramco? I think Saudi Aramco when I was reading this. I got to log back in. But it's they're complicit with cooperation over there in the Middle East as well. So here they've got their fingers in all these pots. So all of this is to say, China hoping to position themselves, maybe starting with Event 201. Also, I never pointed this out, but the Jesuit order in English ordinal gematria equals 201. And this, of course, Event 201 with the Bill Gates faction. This is how we can prove he's part of the Fox faction as well, because we can follow that trail. But all of these events from China onward seem to be cooperating with the Jesuit Fox faction. The fact that Event 201 was held over in China in the first place seems to me to indicate that there is a nexus of evil that is probably failing at this point, and that's what makes me feel good, because I do see us overcoming it. But it doesn't mean they're not going to try. Here's more Fox News Network, Fox 5 out of New York. Funny how New York's Fox News affiliate's Channel 5, for the V-steganography fans out there. There were shipments of nearly 20,000 fake IDs caught at Chicago's airport, and these were to hand out, of course, to people that were likely to vote Democrat in the election. And this is not me speaking for the Republicans, guys. I mean, I've told you, the only thing I'm looking at is who's on the side of the Republicans, and I call them the 3M faction: the mafia, the military, and the Masons. I tend to be on Team Human right now. I don't take a side. I want us to find out our true past, so we can get past this nonsense and overcome the five senses, and so we can activate our minds and truly create our way to a better future. We can do this. I don't care who wins the election. The war is playing out either way, type of thing, right? I don't think it has any commensurate difference who wins the election, because of the greater war that's playing out. As the public relates to it, it will become harder to execute said orders if things get too confused and we have an election fraud on our hands, and it makes things more difficult to wade through the chaff, because I got to tell you, it's the type of thing where it's going to be the George W. Bush and Al Gore election from 2000 for Florida. It's going to be that times 10, 100, maybe a couple orders of magnitude. So the fact that we're already seeing this happen, we're seeing fake polls, we're seeing not fake polls, but this is a great opinion piece that I'll link in the description line below too, to read, to show why the polls were probably never to be believed. This was a January 24th article that I'll, like I said, I'll link in the description. That just it's proving out to be something of a mess and a little bit more chaos than I really want to deal with this time around. There's so much more stuff I want to do with life, guys. That seriously, than even decoding this. I'd rather be teaching the concepts of it. In fact, I've got a lot of requests to start teaching how to think this way, and so I have to put some thought to that, and maybe that'll be something we do over here on Theta that I can conceptualize somehow and get more involvement. But it's just something to keep an eye out for here. It's clearly happening. It's all originating from China, and as this article points out, and then we've also got, not only do we have the counterfeit gold, but we have smuggling of actual gold happening to try and get it out of country. It's interesting that, again, the border protection and the customs websites, back when they confiscated all those $1 bills at the beginning of the COVID scare, almost like, in my eyes, it almost seemed like a smallpox blanket kind of a plot. But they're just using all sorts of different tactics against the United States, and it's very apparent nowadays, and it's very slowly been happening as they've been taking the manufacturing out. They've been attempting to kill the country slowly by this level of subterfuge, so they didn't have to work when the war actually came. But I think we can still get over our woes, especially if something happens internally, like I've supposed with the book. We're gonna do a whole study on this too, on the Patreon side. But the war domain that is space, and the orbital weapons that are up there, and the weather modification systems that are the likely candidate, in my eyes, for what's causing all of the massive droughts, but floods and deluges, the opposite of droughts over in China. So I want you guys to also listen to why, astrologically, from an alchemical perspective, why the sorcerers might choose a time like this to make something like this happen, and why, to me, it just always seems that the Jesuits are playing both sides. There's just hallmarks of Jesuit control on whatever party. It's like they're the ultimate puppeteer for the alien agenda type of a deal. Is the only way I can kind of fathom to put that thought into words. You know, it seems crazy, but you guys have seen the work before. I've said crazier. Let's just listen to Joni Patry for a couple minutes as she describes what we're going to expect here in the coming days as we go into mid-August, and really get an eye on what things might look like as it relates to what's going to play out with China.
Going on, finally, there's going to be progress in healing put towards this instead of this corruption that keeps growing. So there's going to be some explosive events dealing with that. Now, the next date I see is August 13th. And that's going to be when Mars squares Pluto. That can be pretty violent because Pluto is all about explosive events and the clearing. And it does deal with destruction. So Mars, you're going to find anger and frustration and blow-ups around the world.
So we've got August 13th coming up in 2 days here from the date of this recording. So that's going to be on Wednesday. Nope, Thursday. Today is, I'm getting my days backwards. I'm just, sorry guys, I'm tired and I'm behind on stuff and I'm busy. And anyway, we have destruction, chaos, Mars squaring Pluto. Okay, explosive events. She's saying propensity for the couple days after that.
Emotionally, people can't take what's happening to them anymore, and they're being really resistant to the changes that are happening in the world. So another big date is August 14th through the 16th. Remember, that's a time of hurricanes and severe weather and floods and drowning around the world.
So what did we just talk about? We just talked about Three Gorges dam breaking, weather warfare, perfect harnessing of propensities from space, magnetism from the astrology patterns. This is what the sorcerers follow, in fact, with their alchemy. Sorry, my dog's chewing on one of his toys. So we talk again. I'm going to talk more about this in my Patreon video that we'll post tomorrow. It'll post on the 12th is when the next one will go up there. About the astrology patterns that are used, in fact, for harnessing key events, and why at the end of this video, as we transition into that topic, I am supposing that the years that we are in are irrefutably the tribulation years that the prophecies speak of. Prophecies written by astrologer priests who know how to forecast this stuff. Let's remember the Mayan calendar, the Maya, the lifting of the illusion, the apocalypse, which is the telling of truth and revealing of ancient knowledge. This is all forecast to happen at this time as well. So if we can wrap our heads around this stuff, it shouldn't be that much of a stretch to see that as the astrological signs happen in the heavens, how the energies can quite honestly be harvested and harnessed to point toward an event like what we're probably imminently gonna see at the Three Gorges Dam. Joni Patrice saying explosive events, flooding, major weather, hurricanes. We got nothing but major torrential downpours over the top of this dam. So the next week is as good of a time as any to look out for the killing blow to the Chinese Communist Party. What I'm saying is if this goes, I don't know what backing. I think you might see the backing of the Democratic Party, who I think they selected Kamala Harris today to be the vice president nominee, to probably, step in as the president in their eyes after Joe Biden croaks, if that were ever to occur. But I think you might see a massive power shift in the way the tide is going. I don't know how that's going to affect the American population. It's definitely going to affect the CCP and the Chinese kind of collapse of government. But a lot of stuff changing here in the next few days. We'll have to keep an eye out for it. Further on from the communism stuff, we're going to make a hard stop because that's just to show you guys a little bit of evidence. I'm going to link all these articles so you can read them for yourself, and I'm not going to waste your time going through them word for word today. But Robert Sepper made an interesting video the other day, and it was timely because I'm playing a video game right now that's called Ghost of Tsushima, about samurai being invaded by Mongols on the island of Tsushima, supposedly based around, of course, these Mongol invasions of 1274 and 1281, of which the game chronicles what happens. Now, I think if anybody else would go back to the earlier videos that I was doing, especially a couple weeks back when I was talking about the Victory Day steganography, and then, of course, we're talking about ancient Slavic history in the Caucasus Mountains, the area they used to call Africa, where slavery really originates, with the Slavic white people. There's a whole story of lineage that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden and the scientific genetic DNA experiments that seem to have existed there, and all of the Watcher research that I was doing back at, before we got into the whole year zero meme this year, where it became a little bit more steadfast that we cover those topics. Go back and read about the back even with the Mandalorian video that I did, and prior, because it goes into the Mandeans, which tie into the American Mondans, where Lewis and Clark expedition find these giant white people. And you start to paint a picture where, of course, Russia, in an ancient war, used to be called Tartaria, got pushed onto the steppes, and these became the horse people, the Mongols. And they were white, and they were red-haired, and they were only drawn by the Chinese to have the similar facial structure and features that the Chinese had, as anthropologists and archaeologists have discovered, because the Chinese, to depict the events that were happening, didn't bother to be exact with the facial features. So what you have is a big conspiracy to hide this for some reason. And as we've shown before, in the stuff that's coming out just this year, this movie that's based on this book, starring Johnny Depp, Waiting for the Barbarians, is another one of these stories about something that happened with the Mongols. So the Mongols not being actual Asians in nature, we start to get a perspective on what might be hidden here too. And it's another tale of hiding history of the people of the gods, the white people, and we're, and the whole racist mentality of pitting race against race these days, especially during the George Floyd riots and such, seems to me to be all part of the agenda to hide history in plain sight. I'm going to show you just how this video game plays into that, because I was dumbfounded as I continued to go through this video game. It's nuts how much the PlayStation stuff seems to mirror the V-steganography and Wetico work, especially the Wetico work over on the Patreon side too. But let me just kind of broadcast what this is all about here. The invasion fleet, as part of this invasion of the Mongols onto Tsushima Island, was scheduled to depart in 1274. It's delayed by 3 months. Okay, Kublai Khan planned for the fleet attack on Tsushima Island before making landfall in Hakata Bay. The Japanese plan of defense was simply to contest them at every point with Gokennen. Don't know what Gokennen is. It's one of the shogunate labels. Okay. Inconsequential. The invasion of Tsushima itself in 1274, which the video game that I'm playing, Ghost of Tsushima, depicts, is occurrent on Komoda Beach, which also happens in the video game, on the morning of, what do you know, November 5th. Morning of November 5th. No, remember the 5th of November, right? The V for Vendetta phrasing of it's the whole Jesuit order. It's their favorite holiday, it seems. It's V-Day. Or V-Day is also Valentine's Day, and there are all sorts of Cupid riddles that they bake into that day. But remember the 5th of November, the Guy Fawkes gunpowder plot, where the Jesuits infiltrated the UK by sacrificing some of their own, rendering that the threat was no longer there, and they infiltrated and took over the Anglo-Saxon world. And so here we have them invading the Anglo-Saxon world, it would seem, in Japan. And why do I say that? It's not necessarily Anglo-Saxon, but they are invading the samurai class who, unlike popular history would suggest, were not truly Japanese in nature. That's what we're going to get into with Robert Sepper's work. Now, I want people to realize before we get in here, look at the name of the person who directed the game, Nate Fox. Fox Faction. So there's your Jesuit connection there. Here's just the piece of the plot line we just went over that was relevant. But I'm going to show how the Fox plays a more crucial role in the video game as well. That's a little bit more central to it. But first, let's listen to Robert Sepper, because Robert Sepper is going to tell us a little bit about the history of Japan, as you might not have expected, and why I'm saying that you've got a Jesuit plot to control a piece of history that covers up another piece of the Slavic type racial history, I guess. I'm just trying to keep my words poignant and specific so they don't get misconstrued, which is important these days, as you know. But here's Robert speaking of the samurai class.
Celebrated groups of people in modern pop culture. Numerous movies, TV shows, and video games have been made, picturing them in a mythical, mysterious, and noble manner. They made up the ruling military class that eventually became the highest-ranking social caste of the Edo period, from 1603 to 1867. Samurai employed a range of weapons such as bows and arrows, spears and guns, but their main weapon and symbol was the sword. Samurai were supposed to lead their lives according to the ethic code of Bushido, meaning the way of the warrior. Strongly Confucian in nature, Bushido stressed concepts such as loyalty, self-discipline, and respectful ethical behavior. Many samurai were also drawn to the teachings and practices of Zen Buddhism. The islands of Japan were inhabited as early as the Upper Paleolithic period, which means the Stone Age, or Ice Age, with the earliest culture appearing around 30,000 BC. That said, the islands of Japan first started appearing in Chinese chronicles around the 1st century AD. Shortly after, kingdoms of Japan became unified under an emperor, and starting in the 12th century, political power shifted to a series of military dictators called shogun, feudal lords called daimyo, and a class of warrior nobility called samurai. So who were these people, and where did they come from? The answer to that starts with the Jomon period, around 15,000 BC, who hunted but also practiced rudimentary agriculture.
So there's your first little tidbit there after he's kind of going into the history of the Bushido way of the samurai and kind of establishing probably what most of you already know. But the Jomon, which were there for 15,000 years ago, were first thought to be the ancestors of the samurai. The plot thickens as he goes here.
Decorated clay vessels, and are the genetic ancestors of the Ainu people, who comprise a total population of about roughly 100,000 people today in Japan.
So there's your second piece of information. The Jomon are the ancestors of the Ainu people. So the Jomon are an ancient race of some lineage that are not commonly thought of today as traditional Japanese in their look, as you'll find out. And the Ainu are descended from them after some genetic mixing had occurred. I'll continue.
This is a rough estimate, as there's been a lot of assimilation of the Ainu into modern Japanese society, resulting in most Ainu having no knowledge of their ancestry, as they are a community that has been discriminated against throughout the country's history. Surprisingly, genetic research now suggests that the very samurai that have been exalted by the Japanese for centuries might actually be descended from the Ainu people.
So, now we have a third piece of information that you need to have followed. Jomon, ancient 15,000 years ago race. Ainu, descended from them. Now it's being looked at by anthropologists that the samurai are actually of the Ainu people, who are largely discriminated against and their culture forgotten in Japan today. Probably no doubt, because we have false presumptions of what happened and who the people were that even were involved in events that are occluded by the Jesuits. And maybe the events played out similarly to what we know, but even knowing that the Mongols were Russians and that the samurai were Ainu would complete part of the picture of what is being missed. And it's just ever so slightly that things have to be put out of phase sometimes for us to be thrown off. But here, I'll let him continue just for a couple minutes longer.
This is surprising because the samurai are widely understood to have been descended from the Jomon, a prehistoric community that inhabited Japan, but many people believe that the Ainu were racially different and not really Japanese.
So they were racially different and not really Japanese, were the Ainu. And this is why it was some sort of a conspiracy, I think, to cover up their connection with this ancient connection with the Jomon. Very interesting. The plot thickens further.
Study of skeletal remains and a study of historical documents, however, indicate that the Ainu are the descendants of the Jomon and that the samurai eventually descended from the Ainu people. In contrast, most of the Japanese are descended from the Yayoi people, who moved in from China and Korea around 300 BC.
So here's the real crux of it. Most of Japan today is they look almost Chinese because of the Yayoi people that moved into the island, and they are the ones that spread and inhabit it. So who are the Jaman and who are the Ainu? And they're now extinct. We don't even have this fabled samurai class that's actually depicted in video games, again, as actual Japanese people in samurai garb fighting against Asian-looking Mongols as well. When in reality, the Ainu were white and the Mongols were white. Two different types of that variety, kind of like if you were to take modern-day Japanese and look at modern-day Chinese, they're two different people. Genetic mixing over time, I think, probably separated them. But what's interesting here, if anybody's picking up on this, if anybody's screaming at the screen, if I've recognized the resemblance of the word Ainu to the word Anu, as in Anunnaki, and the whole side of the Hebrew epic of the Elohim having genetic experiments in the time of Genesis and the Pentateuch. Remember, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible that we've talked about, ties in with the V-steganography that comprise of the Torah. There's a mystery here, I suspect, to be uncovered, is what I'm getting at. And I don't have all the pieces yet, but I suspect that these Ainu people are somehow related to the Anu, sons of the gods, the genetic hybrid experiment, of which we are actually derived. We humans of today seem to be of this presumption. Therefore, I think the samurai story itself, being shown to us in these video games, and these key events happening in 1274. Remember, the history books are really tough to get any sort of accurate reading on for the truth past 250 years ago, really the founding of this country. Beyond that, it is just a blur, and we are left to the exercises like these to pick apart with steganography what it is that these Jesuits are doing to hide history and why. The Jesuits seem to be part of the erasure of history as it goes, with the genocides of indigenous peoples everywhere. And did they have a part to play with this supposed invasion in 1274 by the Mongols? I have no idea. I want to find out, though. Let's let a couple more points he's going to make here before we move on.
Dr. Loring Brace from the University of Michigan analyzed over 1,100 skeletons of Ainu, Japanese, and other ethnic groups. The skeletons of the samurai were from the victims of the Battle of Kamakura in the year 1333 AD. Ainu people were characterized as having lighter skin, higher bridge noses, and more body hair.
Lighter skin, higher bridge noses, and more body hair. Sound familiar, guys? Sounds like a white guy to me. Even looking at the Caucasian type of brow structure, you know, it's crazy how occluded history is. I think that we've got a reckoning to come, and if these communists have their way, they're going to make it harder and harder and harder for people to learn the truth, because they're resisting anything relating to the agenda that all races on this planet are slaves to some degree. That we're trying to point fingers. Oh, you're a slave more than I'm a slave. We're all, it seems to me like we're all slaves to the same Wetico control system, and it's incumbent on all of us to awaken Christ within and get over it. So I hope these truths are resonating with you, because I'm going to show you a little clip from the video game here. Complete the Fox Den. This game has this samurai game, Ghost of Tsushima, has these fox dens that you can find where they lead you to shrines, fox shrines, where you're rewarded with a charm. So think about that for a second. We've talked about mesmerism and memes and mind control on this channel, the Jesuits having control of us. So literally what's happening here is you're following a fox, one of the fox faction. You're following the Jesuits' way to give thanks at their shrines so that you can be charmed by their narrative, their false narrative. Check this out. This is a scene from the game where this unfolds. So here's a map. Here he goes. An Inari shrine is what it's called. Yeah. So here he goes. You find this fox. Sure enough, you go and follow it. Takes you on this little roundabout journey, blah blah blah. You know, follow it from its den all the way over, usually over a waterfall or up a cliff, or somewhere where it wasn't going to be an obvious spot for you to find before. As you can see, the fox jumps up there. Over the waterfall, there's a little shrine up there that this guy's going to get to. Honor the shrine. So you honor the shrine, and you get a charm. So there's a little spell happening every time, because I don't know how many dozens and dozens of those things you find in the game. So every time, it's an incantation kind of thing if you're not looking at what you're doing. I laugh every time I do it in the game, because I know what it is, but it's my goal to teach you guys all to, if you're going to do the same and be exposed to media in general, that you know what's happening, because the charm of history is fooling all of us is what it tells you. Again, go look at Zach Hubbard's work. I'm going to mention it because as of lately he's been doing a lot of Jesuit World Order stuff, and I also really recommend Walter Veith's work. I am unsure if his Veith last name is purposeful or if it's just his last name. I thought it was funny that he's uncovering Jesuit lies and conspiracies. He's the deepest researcher I know of uncovering the art of war side of the Jesuit casuistry. Zach covers gematria. I cover steganography. Few different types of research to all get to the heart of the Jesuit conspiracy. What is it truly about? This history, this false history diversion tactic that's being used. I think partially it's to avoid the truth about this God race where Yahweh belonged to and what exactly is there. One of my subscribers, Chris, over on Patreon, forwarded me this Alex Gray artwork, which I've seen a ton of times before. Joe Rogan always mentions Alex Gray, but if you can see the similarities in the Yahweh figure and the way that this looks and the way that there's multiple faces around this, it's weathered, but it's an interesting thought to consider, especially as it relates to the concept of this sideways eye, the evil eye, in relation to alchemy, as we've been talking about on the Patreon side. Again, this is going to tie in further with the third Full Metal Alchemist decode that I'm going to be doing and posting tomorrow on the 12th. So one of these things you can find out more about in my suppositions about the Elohim and the Anunnaki and the DNA manipulation in this video right here. This article simply is an extension of what I covered in this video 9 months back. Especially when I was going through a lot of the Andrew Collins work. But anyway, moving on. We're going to get through this video here in the next couple minutes. Just another couple things I wanted to point out as we're seeing with the Space Force and the current war memes unfolding. August 6th, Hermes, this company Hermes, Mercury, also central to all of our V steganography. memes with Cupid, the serpent, the fascia, fascist government, communism. We have Air Force One, which is hopefully using the Hermetic sciences for good for once. But there's V-steganography all over this story. Mach 5 engine, Hermes. Just wanted to point out to you guys a little bit more of this announcement quality marker that we're on this path toward a space future too. So if it gets chaotic here and the war keeps playing out, there's still hope if things like this keep happening, because in this domain the possibility of Star Trek exists, and that's where we've got this Mach 3 civilian craft. So we've got Mach 5 Air Force One private, and then civilian craft reaching Mach 3, more V-steganography. Of course, Virgin Galactic, unveiling front and center. There's the V-steganography to start the indent there, with their space programs. So just more examples of the V-steganography for you guys. We covered this. Here's more of this, as they put on this PJ Media peak idiocy. University declares grammar racist. This is just another ploy to go along with history. If we can't speak with each other, if we can't have discourse with each other, we can't get to the truth. And it could, especially if we don't, if we have different definitions of what proper speech is and ways about communicating things. Oh my God, it's so utterly important that we communicate clearly and concisely with each other. And to deem this racist is just another one of those things, of course. So if you read through this article, it's a ridiculous proposition to take. Rutgers University. Anyway, don't pay it too much credence, but it's happening. We can't get to the bottom of history, was my point, if we can't have the similar lexicon. Then we also have Illinois representative wanting to abolish history classes also as racist. So call something racist and you get it canceled, right? You call samurai history racist, you get it canceled, right? And you just, it's kind of important that we get some light shown on these things, at least to the younger generation that's upcoming, I think, so that they don't fall into the pitfalls. I don't know how to make them aware of it entirely. Of course, I mentor teens on a very small scale, but this stuff's starting to get to the point where you're having these ridiculous stories about libraries all at once confessing that all of their copies of Christopher Columbus letters are forgeries. This opens up a Pandora's box now for us to say, oh, the information in everything that was ever written there is invalid. We can't prove it because it's a forgery. Even if it's a perfect forgery, word for word copy of what it was said, oh, we have to discredit it. I can just see it now. We can't use this as history any longer. And who, over the course of time, is going and replacing, as this article shares, 400 different examples of various pieces of art or of correspondence for Christopher Columbus. What's Christopher Columbus' agenda all about as well? Canceling Christopher Columbus Day because he's racist. That's not to say Christopher Columbus didn't participate in the genocide either, but if you use that narrative to its entirety, to the nth degree, it melds with a whole nother thing that's being concocted in the now. And especially if you can remove any context from history and trust from being able to establish a firm foundation in its reference point. And then, of course, NPR is reporting a third of museums may not survive this year because of the coronavirus. So we're going to lose access not only to art, where you're going to be able to have investors come in and buy up really rare art on the cheap if these things go under, but you're also going to have fewer outlets out there for us to actually attempt to even learn about history. So it just makes this domain all the more important. It's why I'm going to be doing things more live over here. We're going to be doing research, live streaming it somehow in the next couple of months, I'm going to be figuring this out along with you guys, and we're going to have quite the research effort over here, so we can go away from the prying eyes of YouTube and do a lot of the work that matters over here. We'll keep YouTube to the update section. We'll do live stuff over here. Gonna do particular giveaways and different ways to engage on Patreon to make it a good community for anybody who wants to join and support the work there. But it's gonna be fun, everyone. I think the one thing I want everybody to be aware of is, again, I'm going to be posting the next Patreon video tomorrow on the 12th, and it's going to be another alchemy video. We're gonna start finishing up the alchemy, Wetico, and Philosopher's Stone story arc here in the next couple videos. It's a lot more content than I anticipated those being, so those will get wrapped up here by the end of August. I'll probably post 2 more videos here on Patreon by the end of August. Yeah, 2 more videos to wrap that up, and then next month I'll be on Theta, so there'll be a bunch of different topics. I'll be running a poll, I suppose, over on my Patreon to see take some votes. There's a bunch of different directions we could take the research, including the Z steganography I've been talking about. But look out for how the eclipse and the astrology here, like I was alluding to earlier in the video, is going to connect to some of the spells that are happening here, especially in this 7-year period between the 2 totality eclipses that went over the U.S., 2017 and 2024, what I call the tribulation. What does that have to do with alchemy, mind control, Nikola Tesla, communism, other mind control aspects of communism that get banned on the YouTube side? You'll have to pay attention and stay tuned to that video tomorrow. But anyway, I love y'all. I'll be posting my Bitcoin address for you guys too in videos moving forward. I got mentioned that by the same person that referenced the Alex Gray photo in the that I showed here related to the Yahweh article. Thanks, Chris from Patreon, for the idea, because I hadn't put that up there for donations, and I've had a YouTube channel for almost a year now, so it's about time as a Bitcoin advocate. Anyway, talk to you all soon. Love you, like I said, and expect me tomorrow. Thanks a lot.